Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jami Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles, with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit, and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story.
I am so happy to be welcoming Stephen Wright to the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. It's going to be a harder conversation than we normally would have, but definitely one that I think is really, really critical to older adults, and especially older adults who may have ADHD. So, Stephen Wright brings nearly 2 decades of experience spanning military leadership, law enforcement, and veteran advocacy. A former U.S. Army leader and certified law enforcement officer, he now serves on the National Advisory Committee for Military Veteran Education with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and is a certified applied suicide intervention skills training instructor. As co-founder of Sea, Air, Land Technologies, Stephen advises law enforcement drone programs nationwide. He does virtual suicide loss bereavement support group for veterans, first responders, and their families. And I know I butchered it, Stephen, so I'm going to rely on you. But I also want to introduce the audience to how you and I came into this conversation. So we are both in the San Diego area, and we both work with seniors. As those of you who've listened to my podcast before know that I am the founder of Silver Linings Transitions, and we do move management and home organization for seniors, but anybody who really needs us in the San Diego area. And Stephen works for Heritage Home Care, which is a home care company in San Diego. And I'll let you talk a little bit about that too. But we met at a networking event. And for anybody who knows me or you've listened to my podcast long enough, you know that ADHD is probably the second word out of my mouth when someone meets me. And Steve and I got into the ADHD conversation. We discovered that we both had ADHD, and then that into a conversation about mental health and suicide. And I just felt like it was really an important conversation for us to have on the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. So that's a lot to unpack. Welcome, Stephen. And thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for the work that you're doing on this really, really critical topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I think it's an honor anytime somebody asks me to come on and talk to them about the line of work that I'm in.
Yeah, great. So, by the way, Stephen is not a grandmother. I always like to ask a little bit about people's ADHD journey, because I think it helps those of us who are coming to this conversation late to relate to how it showed up in your life before we get into like the serious stuff, but more the playful. Or if it is playful, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, so my discovery with ADHD, I was not happy when I found out about it. I was maybe 22, 23 years old. I can't remember exactly. I do know it was in 2011, active duty orders for the Army. And I was at Fort Meade, Maryland, going to the Defense Information School. I was taking their broadcast combat correspondent course. Basically, I was going to learn how to be a journalist and a media liaison in combat operations. I remember I was taking a class on how to edit video, and I was getting extremely frustrated with the program because I couldn't remember exactly how to use a mouse on a certain program. I was about to destroy some computer monitors, and the senior instructor, he was a Navy guy, came over to me and he's like, "Hey man, let's go talk outside real quick." I figured he was going to tell me to calm down and relax a little. And he was like, hey, your scores coming into this school were really high because you had to test before you could even go to the school. I think you just have ADHD. I was infuriated by that. I was like, there is nothing wrong with me. How dare you? You're not a licensed psychiatrist. And he was like, no, man, you're going to take the rest of the day off. You're going to go do base behavioral health and what I told you, and you're going to seek a consult for psychiatry.
Mhm.
Well, orders being orders, I couldn't tell a guy that outranked me no. So I went to psychiatry. They immediately wrote a consult for me to go off the installation to a civilian provider. Had like a 4-hour long meeting with this individual. And sure enough, came back with a diagnosis of ADHD. And I was kind of like in disbelief. I was kind of disappointed. I was like, wow, there's something wrong with me. I never knew this. And, out of curiosity, I reached out to my mom and I was like, hey, did I ever have any of this like as a child? And she wound up telling me, she's like, well, we got you tested when you were in the 8th grade. And they said that you did have ADHD, but we decided to not treat it. And I remember being even more mad that this was withheld from me and options were withheld from me. And I was just really confused. I didn't know what to think. I thought my whole life had been a lie. Maybe things for me could have been better in life had I known about this and been treated for it a long time ago. Nonetheless, that was my ADHD journey, finding out that I had it. I was at a military school for the Army when I finally received the diagnosis.
Okay. Well, you know what? I have to say that one of the things that I'm discovering as I'm doing this podcast is there are, especially because my audience is older adults. I say 50 because I'm 55, but it's really a little bit older than that. And there's a lot of grief in that, like what could have been, what might have been if I had known. So I imagine that that was exactly what you were going through. And again, because we've stigmatized it by putting the word disorder in there versus brain wiring, just a different way of looking at things. But I have to say, first of all, I'm really impressed that that Navy officer could identify it because there's so many people walking around, and you and I talked about this, that 80% of people who have ADHD have no idea that they have ADHD. I mean, it's just crazy. And then it does explain so much when you get that diagnosis. Okay, so I wanted to have you on, and this is going to be a sensitive subject, but people with ADHD tend to struggle with anxiety and depression. And I've heard that sometimes the anxiety and depression are symptoms of ADHD, but if we were treating the ADHD, maybe the anxiety and depression would actually be better. So I really, especially with you doing suicide prevention and knowing that mental health plays such a role in that, I kind of wanted to hear what you had to say about that.
So, in terms of, I guess you could say anxiety or depression showing up or presenting, in people that have ADHD, I do find that to be intriguing, but I also find that to kind of be the cure for the issue too, if that makes any sense. Mind you, I'm not a licensed physician or anything like that. I can really just speak on my experiences, but I would say not treating it or having treatment options for it, because there's ways you can treat it. You can use stimulant medication. There's different types of therapies. But I would say one of the bigger things is to understanding, how to combat anxiety and depression in individuals with ADHD. I think it is incumbent on the person that has the ADHD to really understand that about themselves. The more you understand yourself and the more you understand your limitations, the more capable you are of overcoming those limitations. And it's those limitations that lead you down the road of anxiety and to ultimately depression at times. A lot of things for people with ADHD can just feel so overwhelming, which causes a lot of the anxiety feeling. And then you have detachment or disassociation involved in that because the people don't want to feel that way. So they kind of force themselves to not feel so anxious, which sadly, unfortunately, a lot of times moves them to feel, depressed, hopeless, like there isn't help for them because nobody understands them. And it's really hard for people to understand them because they don't really understand themselves first to be able to express that to somebody that could help or could provide them with alternative, solutions to overcoming their anxiety and depression caused by ADHD.
I want to also throw out there. So, my mom has allowed me to speak openly about her anxiety and depression. And we didn't realize she had ADHD until she was 76 years old. And she's definitely struggled to access care because there's not a lot available for older adults right now. And that is also including physicians or psychiatrists that are treating ADHD in older adults. So, the awareness is important, but then what? Because, again, they're having such a hard time accessing care.
Well, so I think one of the issues is, the intersectionality of ADHD, depression, even suicidality. A lot of times it's missed. And I think a lot of that comes from just a cumulative strain, decades of inconsistent follow through, disorganization, and even criticism, can harden into like a learned helplessness
Mhm.
and grief over a lost potential. Something I exhibited very early on when I first discovered I had that diagnosis. I was kind of in my own little brain, like, oh my God, like what could I be now if this is treated? Like what has happened here, and additionally, there's, the masking of it and the culture. So, many seniors, especially veterans, tend to minimize the distress. They tend to present as being fine, and they just like to keep the conversations practical. So, the despair kind of hides under stoicism.
Uh-huh.
They're trying to face as being just fine, and it's really not. And on top of that, we've got other transitional factors like life transitions, retirement, bereavement, health losses, things that lead to, like a reduced income strip, their structure and their purpose. And for an ADHD brain that relies on external scaffolding, that's kind of like high risk terrain. So I guess the bottom line is, untreated ADHD kind of compounds isolation and demoralization. And
Yeah.
when structure and purpose kind of fall away,
Mm.
risk rises, and it often looks like they're just getting older, when in fact that's not the case at all.
Do you know, one of the things that I've learned as a result of doing this podcast, and something I did not realize, is that when you have ADHD, a lot of times you need to verbally process with another person. So bounce ideas off of them and kind of just like figure out, problems that you have or even what your day is going to look like. During COVID, a lot of people who lost that structure in their lives discovered that they had ADHD. And I think that's also what's happening with older adults who are retiring or maybe have less responsibility. They don't have kids in the house anymore, and maybe they don't have a partner. We also have higher divorce rates. And I think they also lose the connection with another person that can be that sounding board, which just something I want to bring to your attention and our audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I agree with you. My father is a veteran. He's also a silent gen. And they definitely, whether you were in the military or not, that is a group of people who generally didn't like to talk about problems. And I hope I'm not stepping on any toes, but I don't think our military is addressing the mental health crisis, especially among veterans who take on a great deal of stress and come from this really nurturing community. It's become your culture and it's become your family. And then all of a sudden you're done and you're dumped out there. And also, not to mention the things that you had to go through if you served in a combative situation.
No, I completely agree. So I served 15 years in the Army. I didn't have just the most fantastic transition from military life to civilian life. I wasn't greeted with all these brochures of help. A lot of people call it like an exit interview kind of type of thing. I afforded all of that. I was given a bunch of documents, said, "Are you sure you want to get out?" And that was pretty much it. I didn't really receive like a benefits fair of here's all the help available to you. I didn't receive any training on, hey, we forced you to think like A, B, and C for so long. But in reality, in the civilian world, A, B, and C might help you some, but D, E, and F is probably going to hold you back. So here's how you apply all of that to create X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
So when I say I agree that the military isn't doing enough to address a mental health crisis. I wholeheartedly agree based on my experience, not just with myself, but as a law enforcement officer dealing with current service members and veterans, sitting on national boards dealing with mental health. I see from several veterans the transitional issues that they have coming from the Department of Defense or Department of War into the civilian workforce and civilian lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to take a pause and I want to ask you a couple other questions because I do want to cover, suicide prevention and get into the meat of that with you. But I'm also going to give you a fun question. Okay. So
Okay.
I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before, but I stole this idea from Penn Holderness. I cannot take credit, but I always ask our guests who have ADHD if they could press a button and it would go away. They never have had it. They never will have it. They didn't have it. It's gone. Poof. Would you press that button? So we're going to take a pause to hear a word a little bit more about my book, which I'll just show you here. Stephen, it's called This Explains So Much. Because when you understand that you've had ADHD your whole life, it does you kind of can connect dots that you could never connect. So I've got a couple words coming to those of you who are listening. So I appreciate you doing that. We're going to pause. I'm going to take a sip of water and we're going to come back with Stephen Wright.
You know that feeling when Monday rolls around and you have all the plans, but by Tuesday, you're already behind? Yeah, me too. That's the ADHD brain doing its thing. I'm Jami Shapiro, and I'm launching something I wish had existed when I first discovered my ADHD. Grandma Has ADHD, a membership community for women who found out later in life that they have ADHD and have spent way too long feeling like they don't quite fit in. Here's the thing, going it alone doesn't work for ADHD brains. We need accountability without judgment. We need people who get it. And we need structure that actually sticks. That's why I'm kicking things off with Monday Momentum and Make It Happen sessions. 1 year of ADHD coaching followed by body doubling, where we actually do the things together. No more lonely to-do lists, no more starting strong and fading by Wednesday. If you join the Founders Circle, you'll lock in this low rate for life as long as you keep your yearly membership. Plus, you'll get quarterly private sessions with just me and the other founders as we build this community together. This isn't just another membership created to take your money. This is the support system we've been looking for. Head to jamieshapiro.me to add your name to the interest list. Let's stop going it alone. That's Jami Shapiro, JamiShapiro.me.
We are back with Stephen Wright. I had my sip of water. He has not answered the button question for me because I always like to hear it spontaneously. And before he answers that question, I just want to encourage you that if you know someone who may be impacted by ADHD, or it's you, but you want your family members to understand, I would really, really appreciate it if you would share the podcast with them, like it, subscribe to it, and please give it a review so that more people can find it, because really, we have a lot of people who are walking around unaware with ADHD, and it answers so many of those questions that you didn't even know you had. But okay, we're back with Stephen Wright. Okay, Stephen, the button question. If you could press a button, never have had ADHD, never have it again, would you press it?
That's a really tough question because I feel like it's who I am. So, in short, no, I don't think I would get rid of it. ADHD has absolutely challenged me, yes, but I do believe that it has shaped every meaningful part of who I have become. It kind of forced me to develop grit and adaptability and self-awareness through trial by fire. And, without it, I feel like I might have been more conventional and maybe more predictable. I don't believe I would have been nearly as resourceful or innovative, and certainly not as resilient as I am now. So, I believe my ADHD has kind of pushed me to create structure where there was none and build systems kind of like my own personal command post framework that includes like an end of day brief, like, hey, what did I get done? And things to kind of help me navigate through all this chaos, which is kind of why I believe I excel exceptionally in high pressure roles, where I thrive under adrenaline. You can kind of lead both with urgency and empathy, something that I believe has truly helped my efforts in suicide prevention and suicide intervention. So, the same brain that once frustrated me now kind of fuels my ability to deeply engage, think unconventionally, and connect with others. And I believe if I press that button, I might gain a little peace, but I think I'd also lose, that edge that makes me effective and creative and human in the ways that I believe matters, the absolute most. I've kind of built my entire system around this wiring. Know that I would trade that for anything.
First of all, I have to tell you, of every guest that I've ever had, the way that you described it, it was like a check, 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 resilient, being, able to think quickly. You missed one that totally applies to what you do, and that's that we have a very strong sense of social justice. We believe that the world should be fair, and we want to do our part to make that happen. And you're definitely exemplifying that. I'm going to go off course for a second before we go to the questions, because I have been really wanting to ask somebody in the military this question. I have heard that the military may draw more people with ADHD than the typical society for a lot of those reasons, but also because we crave structure, yet we're really not good at setting that up. And the military is nothing if it's not structured. What is your take on that?
That's very deep. And I don't want to answer that question with any injustice. I do say that makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of people that I know personally that have ADHD that I serve right alongside. A lot of my former colleagues have it. So I would say, yes, I do believe that service kind of gave them a structure. But aside from that, a lot of people with ADHD tend to be very high functioning intellects.
Of course.
And they're certainly the more.
Listen to our conversation.
No. So with people that have ADHD, I would say I've found, including myself, to be some of those service members that serve in pretty unconventional, out of the box roles in the military. As an enlisted man, I did public affairs at a division level asset. In layman terms, I was down here on a totem pole, but I was placed in positions way up here on the totem pole because of my job in the military. And it was that of a creator and a thinker, working with psychological operations teams, civil affairs teams, handling media engagement and the public, constantly having a change in the day-to-day. So while there is that structure from the military, you're also allowed to be very unstructured or pragmatic in the way that you operate, because you don't have the standard wake up at this time, do this, do this, do this. Every day is different for a lot of those serving in the military that do have ADHD, because they tend to find themselves in pretty highly specialized roles.
Wow, that is fascinating. Okay, I'm going to take our conversation back because I want to make sure that we get to it. I try to be cognizant of our ADHD brains can only take so much before we get bored and we move on to the next thing. And I think this is really important. And then, of course, I do want to just talk about what you do with Heritage Home Care. So I'm going to give you the questions that because I ask my guests to provide questions for me. And so the question is, how does ADHD in older adults intersect with depression or suicidal thoughts? And why might these warning signs often go unnoticed?
Okay, so simple. I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but I'll break it down in a more concise manner here. I think a lot of it is missed because when you look at the intersection of ADHD, depression, and suicidal ideation, suicidality in older adults, there's this cumulative strain with inconsistent follow through. The disorganization and criticism molds itself into a learned helplessness, and that alone bears to itself an elevated risk of depression. On top of that, you've got late or underdiagnosed diagnoses. So symptoms kind of get mislabeled as normal aging or mild cognitive change. I'm sure that's a term we've heard a lot with an aging population. So, core ADHD drivers, right? Inattention, rejection sensitivity, and executive dysfunction, because there's 100 different ways we could say, oh, this is just related to normal aging or maybe a mild cognitive change, the onset of something different, when in all reality, it's just an overlooked and extremely underdiagnosed issue of ADHD. On top of that, life transitions, I think, when people are transitioning, like retirement, moving into assisted living or independent living, moving back in with a younger family member, some sort of a caretaker, that tends to strip that individual's purpose and the structure that they already had developed. So once you strip away any structure that they already have, you can kind of see that maybe come out a bit more. The ADHD tends to present itself a bit more, but that also lends to itself being misdiagnosed again as just a cognitive change, a social change in their life. So ultimately, between isolation and demoralization, when you kind of take away or it starts to deteriorate naturally, their purpose, the risk for suicidal ideation significantly increases.
Sure. I do want to highlight for you one of the things about ADHD is that we don't do well with transitions either. So to your point, when you move from your home to a community or to live with adult children, you've just gone through a transition. And, a lot of people don't like transitions, but we with ADHD don't even like, transitions within our own lives. Even like I'm working on this right now. You want me to do something else or answer the phone? That's a transition. So I do want to point that out. What makes suicide prevention in seniors more, different from prevention in younger populations?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, why is suicide prevention different in seniors? And I think a lot of that has to do with the role of connection, purpose, and structure. Again, those are some of the three things that we'll talk about mostly in terms of this. Prevention, just in general, is upstream, but with seniors, it's mainly the routine face to face touch points, like clubs, faith groups, your VFWs, American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, those things kind of counter suicidal ideation, just that sense of belonging. So, something that younger people don't necessarily need nearly as much of is that connection, because we tend to have a lot of that in our day to day. We're out, working in the field or we're dealing with people one on one. A lot of seniors don't have that. So just kind of making sure that they're plugged into a networking group of some sort that meets on a consistent basis can help a lot. And then purpose. I think a lot of these things I'm going to touch on, sometimes you can see youth or younger adults needing, but these are certainly big ticket items for the aging population. Again, purpose, roles that matter, like mentoring, peer support, caregiving hours, project ownership, those types of things kind of restore identity and agency to seniors. And that's something that's very critical for an aging mindset and an aging individual.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something because, we are living, and this is one of my platforms, we're living in an anti-aging society. The word is anti-age. Well, shouldn't we want to age? And I think that what we have done is we've taken the role of, elder, and that respect that we had, and we've, put it aside. And I think that that makes it harder for seniors who have so much to contribute because we may be slower as we age, but that doesn't mean we don't have the capacity and we push them aside. So how do you fulfill your purpose? It's like it's a catch-22 right there. So again, that's a big part of my why and what I'm doing with this work.
Certainly. And, to kind of add to that, I've touched on prevention is upstream, right? So I think with seniors, we need to focus less on the immediate crisis point that they might have, because in all honesty, when somebody is experiencing suicidal ideations, they're not listening a whole lot to what anybody is saying to them, right? They're focused on this is the problem. And that's what a lot of people will come in and try to fix is what is this problem? But the bigger question is what led to that problem, right? And a lot of times we'll realize once we start to focus on the whole health of that individual is that we need to focus more on rebuilding their daily scaffolding, their daily structure that keeps this despair from even taking root in the first place. So,
I want I'm gonna throw one else
Mhm.
that you may not have even considered, and that is, and this is exactly what happened with me and my mom, that when you have ADHD, you're emotionally dysregulated. There tends to be more conflict due to the rejection sensitivity. And I mean, my mom and I were the poster children for this relationship. Not estranged because we were in each other's lives, but it was a very distant relationship. And I'm my mom's only child. And I know she really struggled with that relationship. And I think that loneliness that sets in definitely doesn't help mental health. And now, ADHD runs in families. Had we not discovered that my mom had ADHD and I started to understand its impact, I don't think we would have had relationship repair. So that's another really important thing, especially in suicide prevention, that we start to make peace in our families and understand the impact of ADHD. It's generational trauma and patterns.
yeah, absolutely. That's 1,000% accurate. And I would present one last little bit of how suicide prevention is a lot different with seniors, especially those with ADHD. And that is sometimes people don't necessarily need structure. But as we know, people with ADHD certainly do need structure, whether it's our own self created structure or it's a structure given to us. But I think something that we take for granted that could really help the aging population with their suicidal ideations is simply adding some structure to their lives, like a fixed wake up time, medication routine. These are all things I currently have myself, and I'm only 37 years old. Meals, activity blocks, weekly plans to kind of stabilize their executive function, and all that in turn is going to help lower the overwhelm. So I think ultimately, when you cumulatively put all of these together, you have a fundamental operating principle of connection plus purpose plus structure equals all protective factors. Basically make them visible, make them scheduled, and make them shared.
Okay, I think that was great. And I think that sort of answered the question of what can communities, veteran groups, or caregivers do to create safe, more supportive spaces for older adults. So I do want to just let you mention, that I know you work for Heritage Home Care. How do your, home care providers, are they trained in ADHD? Do they know how to recognize it and how to work with people who may have these challenges?
Oh, well, certainly. It's really not that difficult. A lot of times, what will happen is you'll have somebody like myself go in to do the initial intake or assessment on these individuals. And it's usually not just with them alone, it's usually with their children. Particularly, I would argue a lot of times it's going to be the oldest daughter. And on that intake form, we ask them about their medical history and their psychiatric history. One of the things that we typically ask is, hey, does this person have Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, schizophrenia? And those you'd think are some of the more common questions. One of the questions we ask at intake is, does this person have ADHD?
Wow.
We aren't clinicians ourselves, home care, not home health. We're not justified in making diagnoses, but based on life experience, we can kind of understand what somebody may be experiencing. And a lot of times they might just be experiencing an undiagnosed issue such as ADHD. So we ask about that at an initial intake, and our caregivers know to kind of pick up on things and they relay their notes to us as well so that we can help better inform either their home health team, maybe their hospice team, or their primary care physician at some other facility or whoever they have assigned to their psychiatric health as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're asking, but I would say the majority of people who have parents wouldn't even recognize that their parent had ADHD, especially if they were smokers, which is a whole other conversation. But what I would recommend is that you ask if there's a family history, if there are any children or grandchildren with ADHD, and then take a look at the environment and see, is there a lot of clutter, a lot of unfinished projects, which I know can be more common with seniors just generally because it gets harder to do things and their eyesight isn't as good. And so they don't notice the clutter as much. But I would just recommend, with my work that be a question because a lot of people are going to say no. I mean, if you had asked me 4 years ago, if my mom had ADHD, I'd say no, because my mom could sit and read books for hours. And in my mind, if you could sit still and read, you didn't have ADHD, and my whole world has changed. So
Mhm.
how can someone find you, Stephen, if they want to get in touch with you after this conversation?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And thank you for asking. So they can reach out to me via email. It's Stephen, Stephen, at heritageseniorcare.com. They can go to our website, heritageseniorcare.com, and they can call our office number and simply ask to talk to me. And one of our kind staff members will certainly put them in touch with me.
Nice. Is there anything that I didn't ask? And I don't know about you, but like I'll go to bed at night and then I'll be like, and I'll, I'll ruminate over whatever I didn't say or should have said or wish I'd said. Anything, I don't want you to not be able to sleep tonight because of this interview. Anything that I didn't ask that you wish that I had?
Not really. I mean, I guess I would say two quick things. One is kind of going to be like, what are some practical interventions that we could apply to help reduce suicidality
Mhm.
in seniors? And then the other, I've got a list of resources for people if they want them. And I'll be more than happy to email these resources over to you so you can post them or whatever you. Um, I think I think just a quick few habits, that we could help introduce to their lives to reduce some of the stress, the overwhelm, and suicidal ideations is, have them make like their daily plan, on paper, have them write down their priorities, their time blocks, and keep it visible for them, just one page, something visible and something simple, kind of like a daily routine that they can follow. Like, have I done this? Do I need to do this? And kind of check the blocks. Another thing is, anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes, so an hour and a half to 2 hours of scheduled social contact at a minimum weekly, be it some kind of club, a class, maybe they're volunteering somewhere, whatever, benefits and whatever they like the most. And also make that, on a calendar so they can see it so that they know, hey, I've got to do this, check this block or whatever, right? Movement before, I don't know, noon. So just getting up for like a 5 to 15-minute walk or some sort of like light resistance daily exercise can significantly strengthen their mood, and I would also say, they need to have some sleep guardrails. So like a fixed wake up time, try to reduce the amount of naps or the length of naps throughout the day, because that tends to throw off our circadian rhythm to where we sleepless nights, and sleep deprivation is known to be one of the highest leading factors to suicidal risk. And then medication and medical review. Optimize, their ADHD or depression, anxiety, sleep treatments with a clinician. If they're receiving medications, A, B, and C through Doctor 1, but they're getting other medications, D, E, and F through Doctor 2, maybe have one doctor, review all of those to consolidate all of those to make sure none of those are countering one another and negatively impacting, what we would consider to be a detriment to their overall health. And then, lastly, I guess we could talk on some of the suicide prevention resources that are out there. If anybody is having thoughts of immediate suicide, they can always dial 988.
Oh,
So it's a 3-digit number, kind of like 911, but it's 988. It's a suicide prevention hotline. If you're a veteran, press 1. Also, just a nice little plug to these people at 988. If you're a family member and you think maybe your mother or your grandfather is having suicidal thoughts, you yourself can call 988 and simply talk to these people to ask them like, hey, how do I know if he's actually having suicidal thoughts or not? And just real quick, the best way to figure that out is to ask them directly and bluntly. Are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And if you simply ask that question and don't interrupt, you would be surprised what they would come out and tell you. So 988 is a fantastic resource, not just for those going through the crisis at that time, but for any friends or family members that may be concerned and want to learn how to help better. Also, you can go to SAMHSA.gov. They have under their communities profile something for older adults. It talks about suicide prevention means and methods to try to negate suicidal risk in older citizens. And then the National Council on Aging, they have a really good article that was published, I believe, in January of 2025. They'll give you a really good, in-depth, detailed insight into suicide prevention in older Americans. And you can also go to AFSP, that's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, afsp.org. They have a lot of tabs. I need help. I'm looking for information. I'm looking for ways to get involved. I need bereavement counseling. And there's a plethora of resources listed there on that website as well.
Wow. First of all, I'm blown away, and I really want you to share these resources. The 988 is amazing. I had a child that was suicidal, and I wish that I had known about that resource. And it's so helpful to know that you can call as a family member or a concerned loved one. So thank you. And I just want to put in a little plug that a lot of people don't know that a lot of people with semicolons right now. Oh, and maybe that's how we got into this conversation. So yeah, 2 of my 3 kids have semicolons, and that's, there was a pause. And so that's a way to identify somebody who at one point either loved somebody who maybe lost their life to suicide or has thought of suicide. And so that's just a way to open up a conversation with people too. So I just wanted to put that plug in. This has been amazing. And even for me, just to have learned what I learned, and I loved a lot of the guardrails that you talked about. I'm going to throw one more at you that I just recently have come across being significant for better sleep. And that's weighted blankets, actually. They have found that weighted blankets help with anxiety, which help people to sleep better. So, you need to do a little research. I'm not getting a whole thing on weighted blankets because, especially for seniors, you don't want it to be too heavy. But even for me, I didn't know that this was a thing, but I always slept confined. I always slept between 2 body pillows. I wanted a lot of blankets on me. And I don't know why. That's probably another conversation, but because sleep is so critical, I wanted to make sure I included that. Stephen, you have been unbelievable. I'm so excited that we had this opportunity. And I know that someone is going to hear this, that needs to hear this, and it's going to make a difference in someone's life. And that's really what this is all about. Any closing thoughts?
No, I would say this to somebody that's listening. I have it tattooed on my arm. I don't know if you can read it correctly because the screen, but it says you matter. If nobody has told you today that you matter, just know that you do matter. And if you need help, help is available for you.
I love that. Thank you. Mine says be love, because we cannot be in fear when we're also in love. And we need to just act from that place. Just how can I put love into the world? And by the way, I just want to say this, even for people who are lonely, like you can act love. You don't have a partner, but you can act loving towards other people. And it doesn't have to be romantic love or love from a family. It can just be, hey, I just told the barista she has a beautiful smile. So anyway, thank you for listening, Stephen. Thank you for being on this podcast. Again, if you want to reach Stephen, you will be able to get his information in the show notes, but you can also contact him at Stephen, STEPHEN, at Heritage Home Care.
HeritageSeniorCare.com.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say again. Heritage.
At HeritageSeniorCare.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for listening. I am doing what I can to help you make the rest of your life the best of your life. So we are joined by Stephen Wright. We've just done a really impactful and important conversation on suicide prevention, anxiety and depression, and ADHD in older adults. But we didn't really talk much about ADHD specifically. And Stephen and I were wrapping up the conversation. And one of the questions that I ask our guests is if they have any ADHD hacks. And he started to share his list. And I said, no, we have to record this. So Stephen, what are your personal ADHD hacks?
Wow. So first off, that is a fantastic question that truly made me think, because with my ADHD, I don't just keep a cumulative log of all my things, but I narrowed it down to 3 major things. That is environmental optimization, command post structure. Mind you, a lot of these terms might sound militaristic or police-like, and they are, but so environmental optimization, command post structure, and a mental debrief. So just kind of touching on this environmental optimization, right? The concept, structure your surroundings to control distraction and direct your energy flow. ADHD focus is heavily stimulus dependent. So your environment can either fuel or completely derail and some of those things, like keep your workplace visually clean. And I'll say this is probably my most difficult hack to kind of adhere to. Our ADHD brain doesn't just place things where they belong. I have a disaster, a dumpster fire of a mess, but I know where everything is. But just subconsciously, I know when I pick that clutter up and I organize it, I feel better. I feel less overwhelmed, and it goes to completely just nourish my body. That drive to feel successful, that plays a big role in that. So keeping your workplace clean does a lot more help than I ever really imagined, and then
Before you go to the next one, because you just teed up a perfect commercial for my business, Silver Linings Transitions, because I used to, and I'm not, I used to hire organizers for me and for my mom because it's not something that I'm naturally inclined at or good at, but I recognize that the clutter it's a visual pollution. It's more decisions, it's more fatigue for your brain. But when I started Silver Linings Transitions and we were organizing for people, it's not enough for an ADHD person to go in and organize for them. They need systems. They need to understand how to keep it that way. And so you teed up a plug. So I just wanted to say, if you're in the San Diego area and you want to have that less cluttered environment, reach out to us. But I'm also part of many organizations in other places. And I will say that if you have ADHD and you are challenged with clutter and organization, that's so typical because executive functioning is one of our challenges, and those are executive functioning challenges. So anyway, I had to go with that. So next, Stephen, what is, I can't read my writing now, command post structure.
Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently, and for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized. We'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com.
Yes. So command post structure, I like to run my day kind of like a field operation. And that to me is ideal. So the concept of this is going to be treat your daily operations kind of like a field command. And that might not make a lot of sense for some of you, but just imagine you have to misplace everything. You don't have your nice office like you want. And this is all hypothetical, right? And you have to go to the field. Well, when you're in the field, you're still going to need centralized intelligence. You're still going to need a clear task flow, and you still need to maintain your visual situational awareness. So some of the tips for maintaining this command post structure: centralize everything, use one physical or digital command center, your laptop, your writing pad, a tablet, where every single task or note or reminder kind of funnels into and out from, right? And then you want to limit your inputs. So instead of juggling 5 apps, pick one mission log. I use the Google Workspace. So on Google, I have my email, I have my calendar, I have my reminders, I can create my documents on there. So kind of just limit your inputs. And then additionally, an end of day debrief. Spend 10 minutes before bed or at the end of your day, just kind of jotting out a quick summary of what got done, what needs to get, done tomorrow because it didn't get done today. And then, if you have anything that needs to be escalated, like priorities. So say you have a priority list to begin with, but you only knock out 4 of those things. Well, you've got your 5th and final priority at the end of the day that needs to roll over to tomorrow. Is that going to be your first event, or is that another thing that could be like at the bottom of your priority list for tomorrow? That satisfies our brain's need for closure and gives us structure to meet the next day's uncertainty. And then the last one I talked about, your mental debrief and your reset. Our brains rarely shut off, and we need structured cool downs. This is very important, not just for the ADHD brain, but for overall mental health. It helps us sleep. It helps us find that closure at night, to where even though our brains obviously or inevitably are not going to shut off, they can at least cool down. So the concept is, basically create a structured shutdown for your brain to offload the day's data. End it with a 5-minute mental debrief. In my past life, my past world, law enforcement and military, a debrief is basically the day's over, what happened, kind of like your after action review. So write down any lingering thoughts that you have that won't stop, playing on repeat in your brain, because simply jotting them down will help offload that from your brain so you have much less of a stress load. And then, physical grounding also helps with that. And when I say physical grounding, just a small walk, a 5-10 minute walk. You could do clinical breathing, or in my world, we call it tactical breathing, where you intentionally breathe in and breathe out. And you do that for, 3 to 4 minutes. And that helps to reset your nervous system and helps to really cool your brain down. So just again, to recap, the environmental optimization, make the best you can with the space that you have, your command post structure, structure how your data goes in and comes out of a system that you receive or transmit data through, and then mental debrief, just jog through what happened through the day, what needs to get done tomorrow, and then do some kind of a physical grounding exercise to really reset and cool your brain down.
I love it. That was amazing. Thank you. I'm glad that we went back to play. And other things that we did not cover that you want to share?
No, I really don't think so. Maybe one thing, I'll say, if you're just discovering you have ADHD, or you're struggling with coping with the fact that you've discovered you have ADHD, take a breath. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You're simply wired differently, and that's okay. You can't fix what isn't broken, but you can implement certain measures to help make this ADHD lifestyle a little bit easier. Just observe your patterns, figure out how to focus on what best helps you, and most importantly, give grace to yourself. If you can learn to just be patient with yourself and give yourself a little bit of grace, you won't be so frustrated by your intensity or your creativity or, your deep engagement.
That was great. I actually did an earlier podcast, and grace was the absolute word that I used, grace, because we're so busy beating ourselves up, and everyone did that for us. And now is the time to say, hey, I believe, we're here for a reason. We're given the tools that we need to do what we need to do. And we were given this ADHD brain. And I love Dr. Ned Hallowell's that having ADHD is like having a Ferrari engine for a brain and bicycle brakes. So it's really just, tuning your craft. It's like figuring out, like, for instance, hyperfocus is the one that I love, and of our ADHD superpowers. Hyperfocus can be annoying for people when they need you to do something and you want to do X, but also when you want to get something done or you want time to pass, then that's the time you put yourself into hyperfocus. So, that's fine tuning that engine. So I'm so glad that we came back to this conversation, and thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been a pleasure. It's certainly been an honor, and I greatly do appreciate your time.
Thanks.
The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.